Hello and welcome to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraim Martinez. I am a principal in search of wisdom, and I have found productivity to be a great tool for success. Today, I have the great and distinguished honor of having with me Grace Stevens, who is a former corporate professional who quit the VP life to pursue her dream job as a public school teacher. After 20 years in the classrooms, she now focuses full time on helping educators have a more positive teaching experience. Grace combines her signature mantra: your energy teaches more than your lesson plans. I love that. With 2 decades of study in behavior therapy, positive psychology to create science based habits for overwhelmed educators. She is the author of the best selling Positive Mindset Habits for Teachers and the One New Habit book series. You can find her in gracestevens.com. So let me ask you, Grace Stevens, who are you?
Well, first off, good morning, and thanks for having me here. That's a very existential question just this early in the morning. I would say, other than obviously you told everybody what I do. I like to say we need to separate our worth from our work. So who am I? I would say, a lot of things: a parent, a partner, a friend, a daughter. But at my essence, I would say I'm a learner and I'm a teacher. Because no matter what situation I found myself in, what stage of life, I have always wanted to learn. And in one capacity or another, I've always been teaching. So that's basically, if you were to say, who am I? That's pretty much who I am, which I think can be said of a lot of teachers. The best teachers, I feel, are lifelong learners, right?
Amen. For sure. Thank you so much, Grace. I appreciate it. So I know I talked in the introduction about you, but can you talk to us about that origin story, that background history of the professional trajectory up to this
Sure.
point?
All right. So I grew up in Europe. I was educated in Europe, and I came to the United States on a business trip, actually. I was only 22, and here I am, like 30 something years later. I ended up staying here, but I was I got married very young, and I went on this trajectory of what I thought I was supposed to do: get this corporate job, pursue the American dream, right? And I climbed the corporate ladder really quickly. By the time I was 30, I had really achieved most of certainly the financial goals I'd set for myself: beautiful house, all the things. And then I had these two wonderful young children, and I was just really stressed, overwhelmed. I remember one time I was with my husband. We were laying on a beach. It was our wedding anniversary. It was our 10th wedding anniversary. And he said, "Oh my gosh, look at our life. We had $27 between us when we got married. We got married at a courthouse." And I remember him saying, did you ever think our life would turn out this way? And on the inside, I just wanted to scream, and I wanted to say, but I don't participate in it. Like, I financed it, but I felt like I outsourced most of my life. Here's who looks after the kids. Here's who does it. And all I was doing was running, hopping on planes, going in meetings, didn't feel connected to what I was doing. Felt like I never gave enough at work, never gave enough at home. I was in this total guilt space all the time: stressed, overwhelmed, burnt out. And I just couldn't take it anymore. And I really, even though it meant a huge lifestyle shift, I was like, no, I want to be a public school teacher. I want to see value in what I'm doing. And it's causing me too much stress. And so I went back to school, even though I had two young children of my own. Went back to school. I like to say my son and I started first grade on the same day. Like, I started teaching first grade, and he was in first grade, my daughter was in third grade, and it was magical. I loved it. Teaching for me, it was like winning the jackpot. Like, it made me happy. I found it easy. It had meaning. It had purpose. All these things which I didn't realize at the time were, foundational building blocks for happiness. But I have to say, within 2 years, I'd recreated the same circumstances for myself. Overwhelmed, burnt out, not given enough to my students. Also, I felt constantly feeling guilt-ridden when I was at home, that my mind was elsewhere and I wasn't present with my children. Complete lack of boundaries, couldn't say no to anything, kept feeling like I got to give more and more and more. The answer was always to do more, to work more, to stay later. And it was burning me out. And I really had to decide, like, I just can't change careers again. Like, the issue is with me. And so I went on to this deep dive of, like, how do I fix myself? I had never planned, like, oh, I'm going to grow up and, be an educator empowerment coach, which is basically what I phrase myself as now. So anyway, I did fix it. I'm not saying it wasn't a one and done. It was an up and down journey. For the most part, teaching for me was magical. It was my happy place being at school, but there were different periods of burnout. But I did notice that my experience was very different from other people's experiences, and that's what led for a long time I worked in a very small Title I school. So essentially we all had the same kids. Like, it was a TK through 8th. We had less than 300 kids. So it was all the same kids, the same families, the same administrator, the same, I wouldn't even say resources, I'd say the same lack of resources, right? We were all dealt the same cards, but my experience was way different than other teachers. And they would ask me, like, why do you seem to be having a better time? Why do those kids react differently to you? And I had written a book called The Happy Habit, like, I want to say maybe 15 years ago, but it wasn't about teaching. And so I decided to turn that into, well, how does this play out in the classroom? What are the habits based on science that I had learned, that I had practiced? And so I wrote Positive Mindset Habits for Teachers. Well, so that was me in the classroom, super happy. But I did tell myself I would be a public servant for 20 years and then I would do something else. And 20 years brought me into COVID, through COVID, post-COVID. So I do know the classrooms. I taught 2 years after COVID. I just moved out of the classroom at the end of 2022. So very different landscape. But I had some personal goals. I was moving. I felt like I really didn't want to start again in another school district. If I only had a few more years in the classroom, I felt my impact would be greater if I actually worked directly with teachers, helping them have a more positive experience that could help more students in the long run. So then I went full-time into making courses, a podcast, other things, working on some other books to help teachers understand they can have their own experience. Not to say it's easy. It's not about positive psychology, like, stick a happy face sticker on an empty gas tank. That doesn't help anybody. But to teach them real skills, set boundaries, understand what I just said at the beginning, separating your worth from your work, especially when the work is as difficult as we do, and when we don't see tangible results. We're not an architect. We don't draw plans and then see a finished building, or we don't build cars. There's nothing to really, at the end of the day, we're never really sure the impact we've had, right? We're not going to look at test scores as our impact, but we don't have something physical to look at and say, oh, I just did that, right? So it's especially helpful with that kind of environment, I think, to have your own internal compass, know what's important to you, know what you know is important to kids, and live by that, but then somehow manage to separate yourself from the test scores or what other kind of random matrix we have. As you know, it's public education, at least was for me, that they're not widgets. The ones who aren't performing or aren't, come to you perfectly ready to learn, we don't get to kick them off the assembly line. Like, we're gonna embrace everybody we got, and that doesn't make for, perfect linear progress. So anyway, so that's kind of how I got here, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. I do have to say that, even though there was, more than a few days crying under my desk, hiding at lunchtime, it just is what it is, right? But
Sure.
where I'm at now is good, and I enjoy sharing my wisdom, my ideas, my support, really, with educators all over.
Great. Thank you so much. You have You have shared so much in that one response. I have a couple of follow-up questions.
Uh-huh.
I was also a career changer, and I
Yeah.
know that when I switched to education, I faced a lot of societal pressure of how can you leave this
I know.
X career for the
Yeah.
education? What advice do you have for those people who are switching? What lessons have you learned on how to deal with that pressure?
Well, firstly, you know what? No one's ever really said that to me. Yeah, I got a lot of that. Like somehow I was underachieving. I mean, that's just the truth of it. That's what people kind of like told me. Like, oh, you're an underachiever. Like, what? They're like, oh, you're taking the easy way out. Easy? Have you substitute taught? Have you spent time in a classroom? No, I'm taking the impactful thing. So the advice I would give is really much of stress, or at least my stress, but I think, I've studied this a lot, comes from when your outward actions aren't in line with your values, right? And so a lot of people inside a corporate career, for me, see, here's something I taught. So my career was, I worked for one of the world's largest staffing agencies. Actually, I think it is the world's largest staffing agency now, international. When I first started, I was helping people find jobs, and I found a lot of value in that, right? I got relationships with people, I helped them find jobs. Awesome. Then I moved up to management. Okay, now I'm working with big companies moving into the area, and they're like, I live in the Silicon Valley, California, like so many new companies coming in. How are we ever going to find a workforce? So you forge relationships with those people, you help them get a workforce, you help them build their companies. So rewarding. Well, moving up, now I'm a corporate VP. Now, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm not really with the end users. And in the end, I wanted to cut back the hours I worked. I was like a national sales rep. So somebody else would have the relationship, somebody else would service the clients. I would fly in, close the deal, fly home. Really, the only value I made, the difference I made was to shareholders, I felt, because whether they hired our company or somebody else's, thank you. So anyway, so I'd remove myself from the stuff that was really important. And so if you have a job that you feel is out of line with your values, that causes you a lot of stress. And that was where a lot of my anxiety was coming from. But there were really some practical applications. Like I'd had a corporate career for almost 15 years at that point. And so I had some financial stability. I was also married at the time and had a partner who could kind of ramp up his career. At the time 13 years later, very unexpectedly, got divorced. And now you're a single parent on a teacher's salary. Like, oh my goodness, right? It's not always possible for people, which is why I started my, what I would call side hustle, right? Started writing books, like it was just a financial reality. So if it is, first off, go with your own moral compass. There is nothing more important than education, I feel. Everybody's right to have a fair and equitable education is really the basis of society. How we're going to fix our problems unless students are educated, students are understand critical thinking, understand how to evaluate media for bias. Like, no, they're not going to learn that from their parents. Like, they're going to learn it in school. So it really is important, but you have to take into account, your really, your financial reality too. And it's really horrible that I have to say that, but that is, being broke is stressful. I mean, I studied a lot of the research, like money doesn't make you happy, right? Like once you have a certain amount to have your needs met, having more in the bank really doesn't do much for your baseline happiness quotient. But not having enough money is really darn stressful, especially when you're a single parent. So there is a financial reality, but I would really tell people, really look at your values, see who supports you. Don't worry what other people say. Like, people don't get it. People outside education don't get it. I remember my ex-mother-in-law, I said I worked at this Title I school. It was a little rural school, a lot of migrant workers, so the population, the kids rotated in and out, and we had very poor resources. And the day that my mother-in-law came to visit me, I was so proud for her to come see me be a teacher, and she said to me, "Wouldn't you rather work in a real school?" I was just like, Oh my gosh. Because, like, to be honest, our toilet was a portable in the middle of the field, the
Mhm.
staff toilet, right? And, like, when it rained, we had a plank of wood. We called it walking the plank because otherwise your feet got muddy, right? So, obviously that wasn't ideal for her coming to visit, but, like, we were used to it. We didn't care. But yeah, it just so sometimes you just gotta, yeah, I had many people in my family like, why did I went to university in 4 countries. I was the first person in my family to receive a university education. And so they're like, just be a teacher. Like, yeah. So yeah,
It's
it is
it's
hard for
difficult to
people to
read.
answer.
It's
Yeah.
definitely a complicated, so there's no like perfect answer, but at least it gets us to proximity.
Yeah.
Another follow-up question, you wrote about habits.
Hmm.
Can you tell us about perhaps a habit that you have not mentioned today that you should be that we should be aware of and practice?
Oh, well, there's a lot. I would say a simple place to start. Now, simple is not easy, right? So, simple means when I say it, you're going to be like, really? But understand that you got to override a lifetime of conditioning to the opposite and a societal kind of culture to the opposite. And I would say the biggest habit that's had, well, there's been two, but I would just say for this one is focus on what you want, not on what you don't. And that
Mm.
sounds really simple, but it is really, there is so much to notice. Okay, so I don't want to get all nerdy, okay, but I have studied a lot of brain science. Um, and I don't. So at the base of your skull, there's a little bunch of cells, the reticulating. I'm not going to get into all the science of it, but anyway, it helps filter out, right? If you think about all the sensory experience that happens to you all day, there's just too much. You can't take it in. And so you have a filtering system, right? And so you just kind of filter out. Now, the brain has developed over time to keep you safe, not necessarily to make you happy. Right.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so we have, I'm sure we all remember from like, psychology 101, confirmation bias, right? We notice the stuff that makes us, that kind of reconfirms what we're already thinking. So if we're thinking that the world is full of, well, Einstein said my favorite quote, the most important decision we ever have to make is whether we think we live in a friendly or a hostile universe. Okay?
Wow.
So now, if you really think the world is hostile, everybody's out to get you, all these kids are dysregulated, these parents are out of control, nobody has discipline, like all that stuff, that's what you're going to notice, right? Because your brain wants to confirm what you already think so that you're not crazy. And then on top of that, what you listen to on social media, what you watch, everybody's listening to true crime or binge watching, CSI or whatever, like that's not really confirming for you that the world is a friendly place, right? So for me, the world is a friendly place means I'm thinking people are doing the best they have with the skills they have in the situation they find themselves in, right? And I see evidence of that, which allows me to give people a lot of grace. And I tune into who is learning, who is trying hardest, who has moved their benchmarks, even if they're still, that's the horrible thing, right? In a classroom, you got some poor kid who's way below, right? And you work with them all year, and you know that at the end of the year, they're going to take that test and they're still going to be way below. So in nobody else's mind, they didn't make any progress. But in your mind, you saw the gains that they had in the confidence in themselves as a learner, in whatever else. Like, so focus on that, like really get into the habit, and there's a lot of things to it, but try and get into the habit of focusing on what you want, not on what you don't. You're going to find evidence of whatever you look for. That's the way the brain works. So why wouldn't you look for the good stuff, right? That was really my whole process. Like, when I call myself a teacher empowerment coach, like, yeah, there's so much out of your control and so much of it is so overwhelming. But in your classroom, where I was the queen, right, with my little kingdom and my little subjects, and we created magic, a community of cooperation and caring and encouraging each other. And when you focus on your locus of control, not on all the other stuff, you can craft out your own experience, feel empowered to do that. So that's really, an overarching habit is focus on what you want, not on what you don't.
Beautiful, powerful. Thank you so much, Grace. Grace, like in Back to the Future, if you could go back in time to any point in your career, what will the Grace of today tell the Grace of back then?
Oh, well, I already told you the lesson. Like wherever I like to say your problems have passports, right? I know, right? Like where you're going, you can think, I'll be happier in a different grade. I'll be happier with a different admin. I thought I'd be happier in a different career. And I ultimately was, but you're going to take yourself with you. So you got to find a way to like just find the joy in where you're at. So the first thing I would tell myself is there's always going to be one more thing to do. Right. So when I say I recreated the same circumstances, the first year I taught, I would get home from school at a reasonable hour because I had daycare responsibilities. And then I would be with my kids, put them to bed, help them with their homework, do all the things. And then I would start working again. And the limit I set for myself was I would stop working at midnight. What kind of limit is that? I would be up again at 5:30 in the morning. And I kept thinking, because it's my first year teaching. So that was the first year teaching. Then the next year, they put me in a second grade with a split class. Okay, that's a lot of work. So I had the same habits, right? So then the next year, you're in a different grade. I just kept telling myself it will be better when. It's not going to get better. This is public education. If you do your job really competently and you get it all done, guess what? They're going to give you more. That's just the way it is. And they're not going to say, oh, now you have 2 jobs. Here's 2 paychecks. It's like, yeah, she can handle it, right? She never complains. Her kids don't come to the office. Like admins are just making it easy for themselves. It's not an evil design. It's just, right? And so I would tell myself there's always going to be one more thing. It's always going to be, after the grading period or after the winter program or after this or after that. So like set some limits. Like there are certain times of the year that are busier than others. Yes, but on a consistent basis, you can't wait for it to get less or easier or have easier kids or the dream class or whatever. Like just settle in, set some boundaries and enjoy where you're at, right? Don't live for the weekend. Don't live for spring break. Don't live for summer or woe betide. I see teachers living for retirement. Like you might not make it that far, right? So that's number one. And the other thing I would really tell myself is have your own experience. Have your own experience of students, have your own experience of parents, of co-workers, of admins. When you're new in a school, especially in a small school, everybody got like little cliques, like this person's this and this person's that, or this student's this. Like we all knew the students, we had so few of them. Just allow yourself to have your own experience because, every kid, we all know this, right? Like, when you get those, I don't know, we used to call them pink and blues, probably not, the little slips where you see what the teacher said about them the year before, never looked at them. I'd look to see if they needed special services, like their IEP, a 504 or something, right? They need special support. But like, I was not going to read those comments that a teacher taught. Like, just give the kid a clean slate. They might react. They might have matured over summer. I would always say that when this teacher would always say, oh, how's such and such doing in your class? I would just smile and say, oh, they must have matured over summer. They're doing great, right? Like, why am I gonna do that to a kid, right? Even, if they're not doing great, I'm going to deal with it in my class. I'm not going to deal with it with a committee at the staff room, like I'm going to, so have your own experience. When you come into a school and they're like, oh, the admin's out to get you if you're not tenured and this and that, it's so easy to get pulled into that. And coming back to what I said before, then you're going to find evidence for that. Sometimes you have to get out a piece of paper and say, let me write down the facts. Here are the facts. And when you write down the actual facts, like, that's not what's going on here, right? So just allow yourself to have your own experience. So those are the 2 things I would say. Is 1, don't delay it. It's always going to be more. And number 2, just have your own experience of people.
I love that. And you also mentioned before that our profession is not like an architect that you see a final product. There's always going to be a new challenge. So why not live the moment, the experience, instead of saying, "Oh, one day when I retire, or one day
Yeah.
when I master the first grade curriculum, etc."
Yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Grace. Let's talk about books. If you will have to gift two books to a loved one, a fiction and a non-fiction, what would those books be?
Okay, non-fiction. Well, I don't know if I'd be gifting them because they would be people would be eye rolling them at me. They're rolling their eyes at me. They'll be like, "Ah, really? Here she goes again." I would say for a girl who only studied literature, right? So, like, I went to school in Europe. I started my degree in London. Then I did a year in France and a year in Italy, speaking Italian, a year in France, speaking French, 17th century French literature. In Italy, it was all about Dante, 12th, 13th century. Like, it was only literature, like a little bit of history, but I'd never really read a nonfiction book other than, like, history or whatever. And so the first book I read that I would say was personal development, blew my mind, was Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I'm going to tell you, I was in my mid-20s when I read that, and it blew my mind, the whole idea of paradigm shifts and taking responsibility for yourself and your own experience was literally blew my mind. So to me, that is always the book. I always go back to there. There is so much wisdom, practical wisdom in that book. Those habits cannot see you wrong. And so I would always recommend to somebody, if they were, never really read that type of book, I'd like, just go with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it has some deeply kind of, I would say, not religious overtones at all, but like just, kind of a little bit of like inward looking spiritual stuff, but it is really packaged in a way that's very accessible as far as, very practical skills. So I would say that is always good for everybody. Fiction, you know what? That's just like recommending a movie to somebody. Like, I love my partner, but we cannot agree on a movie for the life of us. So probably what I like to read, it's not going to be maybe what other people like to read. But I do, I love to get lost in a story. I love to read actually stories about books. I was just thinking about this, like, the last few books I've read have been about libraries. I read a great book called The Last Library in London, and it was really about the power of storytelling to help people transcend difficult times. Plus, it was set in London during World War II, which was really my parents' era, and so I found that kind of very nostalgic. All the places it talked about, I knew. So like when you can find that personal connection, I think with a story. So I'm not sure that book would be as magical for somebody who didn't grow up in London, who had parents telling them stories about the war, who also, my own childhood experience was, for me, libraries were magical. I always had this fantasy of getting locked in the library so I could read all night. We didn't have any books at home. How nerdy is that, right?
That was the fantasy of Abraham Lincoln, to be stuck in a library. That was the fantasy, yeah, because he had to go and search for books all over the city. For sure, that was his fantasy.
I used to honestly think, if I could just hide behind here, and like then I'd be here all night. I still love. I can afford books now. I just like to go to the library. I still go to the public library at least once a week. I think they're magical places.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Grace. So let me ask you, who is or who are your biggest influences?
Well, I would say first off, my mom. I know that sounds really but my mom was an immigrant. She came to London when she was very young. And she had never really had the opportunity to go to school. She was born during the war. She was a 13th child in a family of 14. She went to school till she was 8, I think, and then she was pulled out of school and became a seamstress at 8. And so functionally illiterate, certainly in English. She could read and write in Italian, but, for a girl growing up in London, my dad always worked 2 jobs. My mum at home couldn't read the notes that came home from school, never went to the school conferences because she felt embarrassed. And yet she always worked. And she is just a really resilient person. She's had a lot of challenges, but when you're with her, you just laugh. She just always wants to laugh. And I think part of it might have been, growing up hungry in a large family in the war, but she loves to cook, and just, I feel like magic always happens around her and food. So anyway, so she's 87, and she actually, last year I took her on a dream vacation. We went to Crete together, and I'm telling you, we had as much fun as you could ever have. And it was, me and an 87-year-old woman who has mobility issues. We just had a blast. So she's just very a resilient person, and she has always championed me. And so that's wonderful. So her, and then I would also say, huge influences on your life can be people you'd never met. I would say Dr. Wayne Dyer, who was a spiritual teacher, and I saw him once at a conference, whatever, but I've read all of his books. In one of the things, kind of like that Einstein quote that I said, something of his that always stays with me, that he'd said is, happy people live in a happy world. Hostile people live in a hostile world. Same world. And I really always thought that about classrooms. Happy teachers have a happy classroom. Angry, frustrated teachers have angry, frustrated classrooms. Same kids, right? Same kids. And so that, I would say that has profoundly had an influence on my life. So
deeply profound. I'm gonna definitely steal that one. Thank you so much, Grace. I appreciate it. So let's take a quick second to celebrate the Teach Better community.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
Okay, my last question on the wisdom side of the show. We all deal with this, but we don't know how other people do it. How do you address imposter syndrome?
Oh, depend on the day there, Dr. Martinez. I would say it's a little bit easier for me now. One, I've lived a lot of life, and the older you get, in my experience, the less you are concerned about with other people's opinions, and it's a beautiful thing. One, I'm always remember your compass, like what is my intention? And if people don't connect with that intention, and are not drawn to that intention, then they're not my people. It's okay. So I remind myself that, how people react to me is a reflection on how their day is going and what they're doing, right? Like I said, my view of the world as a friendly universe is people are doing the best they have with the skills they have. And I'm not for everybody. I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I'm okay with that. I don't need to be everybody's cup of tea. So that's number one, is like I just get less, I just focus. If I know in my heart my intention is good. Now, having said that, I always used to say to my own adult children, like, in his mind, I'm sure, even if you look at the world's worst dictators, in their minds, it probably all made sense, right? Like, nobody thinks they're evil. I don't think what I'm expounding, which is personal responsibility and finding joy and championing children, is evil. But, some people take offense to the notion that I wrote a book, Positive Mindsets, right? Like, a lot. I love that it is used as book studies on some campuses. But, there's always going to be some person on campus who is fed up with just about everything and really in a bad space in their life. And for their admin to bring them a book, Positive Mindsets, they're just not going to be happy. They're going to be like, now I got to be happy on top of everything else. Like, they're going to take it personally. And so that has happened to me a few times. So with age, being less concerned. Also, the more body of work you have, like, okay, somebody will leave me a bad book review or whatever. I got 500 good ones to balance out that, right? You look for the evidence, look for contrary evidence, right? Like, I know in my heart that what I have to say is helpful to many people. And again, if it's not helpful, take what you need and leave the rest. Move on with your day. There's so many choices in life, who to listen to, who to watch, who to ask questions to. And so that helps keep it in perspective. But just, not taking things personally, I think really is something that comes with age. I think everybody has something of value to offer. When I just say that, my mother has had such a huge influence, I feel, on a lot of people. And she wasn't educated. She's not terribly articulate. And so, when you feel like that, the root of the imposter syndrome is that voice in your head that says, who am I to such and such? You know what? You're all worthy and you're all wonderful. And once you come from that mindset, then, who am I pretending to be? Imposter syndrome isn't something I've felt for a while. Now, every time before I hit record on a podcast, maybe for a nanosecond, or just before I publish that book and be like, oh, yeah, am I ready for this? It's inviting criticism into your life, but it's like being in the classroom. Focus on the one kid who is learning, right? I can't go into a classroom and be like, okay, I have 38 kids. Every single kid is going to get so much out of today. No, I've got to you know what? You got to have confidence in every single lesson. One or two kids today, that magical sound when a kid goes, huh, oh, now, they got it, right? That's magical. So that's what you focus on. If you focus on that, you don't have imposter syndrome.
Love it. Thank you so much. Very inspirational, Grace. Let's talk about productivity. So as you know, productivity is important for the success in any area of our lives, but this means different things for different people. What does it mean to you, and how do you get organized to have a fructiferous life?
Well, there's a lot of things. I find now that I have more freedom in my schedule, which certainly for many years I did not, right? Young children, single parent, working, side hustle. You just kept going no matter what. I've always been very attuned to my own body rhythms. So I'm a morning person, right? I'm not going to do my best work at 11 o'clock at night. I'm just not. I'm going to do my best work at 5 o'clock in the morning. And it's the only time I have quiet to myself. I'm going to get up at 5, knock out an hour's worth of work on my own terms, feel like I accomplish something before I get dragged into everybody else's needs. My kids at school, all those things. So one, focusing on your body rhythm. Don't fight it. If you're not a morning person, don't try and do your worst things in the morning. So body rhythms. Number 2, I'm a big fan of eat your problems for breakfast. So what I mean by that is do the least desirable task first thing. Now, for me, I'm lucky it syncs up with my natural body rhythms. Now, if it doesn't, it's going to be hard for you to eat your problems for breakfast. But let me tell you what it does to you if you don't. Let's say the problem is you got the email from the parent and kids getting bullied and they're all defensive and you didn't do anything about it. And, they're off on their tirade. And for me, I would go in early in the morning. Let's say that email came in at 8 o'clock the night before. I set boundaries. I don't respond to emails that time of night, but I would go in early, knock it out, even try and call the parent. Hey, can you call me on your way to school? Whatever, just get it out the way. Otherwise, all day it's going to eat at me. I'm going to rehearse this conversation in my mind. I'm going to make it a bigger story than it's going to be, right? It's going to eat away at me. I'm going to have anxiety and a stomach ache all day. I'm not going to be present in the classroom. And now this thing that, could have been easily resolved. Now you're an admin, so hopefully you don't do this to your staff, but when that admin emails you, stop by after school.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, dude, stop by after school to discuss what a great thing you've been doing or whatever. That teacher's mind is always going to be, what did I do? Well, my objective's not on the board with that, whatever.
I've been guilty of that.
Yeah, right.
Definitely been guilty. Absolutely.
So if you're a teacher, eat your problems for breakfast, get it out of the way, do the least desirable task all day. Don't let it hang over your head all day. Otherwise, even if it's unpleasant, it's better to have 5 minutes of discomfort in the morning than to have the discomfort all day. And then by the time you do it, you've made it a bigger deal in your head. So those are 2 things. But as far as just getting stuff done, I'm a big fan of the Pomodoro technique. I'm sure you've talked about it before on your podcast, time boxing. So let's say like a prep period is 1 box. Fingers crossed that you get your prep period, right? That you're not covering another class or something happened, but 1 box. After school, for me, 2 boxes while I'm still at school. When I get home, another 3 boxes. What's a box? It's a half-hour period of time where I'm going to focus just on one task, single tasking. Done a lot of, I published a book, honestly, One New Habit on Being Productive. It was about procrastinating and all the research that says you cannot multitask, like you've got a single task. And so you set your timer. I just have an app on my phone, whatever, for 25 minutes and just focus on that one task. And then when the timer goes off, you've got 5 minutes stretch, walk around, do whatever. And just really just focus on that one task. And then also make peace with not everything being perfect. Sometimes it's really important. You've got to move it to another box. But other times you're going to be like, especially with a lesson plan or a slide deck that I'm making, 80% done. It's okay. Not everything needs to be 100%. Like, it's better to have it done than to wrestle it to perfection and then 5 other things didn't get done because you had the perfect Bitmoji on your presentation. And so I am a big fan of time boxing. I find it checks a lot of boxes for me, no pun intended. One, it helps keep me focused because especially if it's a task I'm not really excited about, like it's only 25 minutes. You can do anything for 25 minutes, right? And then the other thing, it keeps me honest because, I've been as guilty as anyone saying, I was at work until 6 o'clock. Like, but were you working? Like, do a quick time audit. What were you spending your time doing? Right? Was it really working? I used to, one of the things, a lot of teachers want to have a common prep period with their peer grades, right? Because otherwise, how are you going to lesson plan? How are you going to do stuff? But I always found that was a mixed blessing because, your bestie would come in and maybe they were just on their way to the copy machine or something. And then they start talking and you start talking and, oh, you won't believe this. And they're like, oh, no, well, you won't believe this. It's like competition, right? Whose kid was the most dysregulated or who had less sleep or whatever. And you've lost that whole time. And so I had to just be really disciplined. And, when my bestie would come in, I'd say, love ya, set the timer. Here's my 5 minutes. Let's chat. And then I've got $25 minutes worth of work to do. So it was still my time box, but instead of having my 5 minutes reward at the end, I was having my 5 minutes reward at the beginning. But then, I would just tell her, I'd say, I think we'd both be at love you. Or, once a week we would do a walk and talk lunch and we'd just chat to our heart's content. But it was I would just tell her, and it was true. I think we'd both be more happy at the end of the day if we accomplished something during our prep period. So, set a timer on it. But I would say time boxing is very helpful. The more you do it, the more you realize, does this need a whole box? Is it really not important? And I'm also a big fan of the not to-do list. The to-do list in teaching is too long. And as I said before, if you complete it, they'll just give you more to do. So really just being realistic at the beginning of the week, having a really strong compass. For me, my compass was, does this move the needle for students? And if it didn't, if it served somebody else's agenda, there were plenty of times I just cross it off the list. I'm just not doing it. I'll wait till I get that second email. Hey, did you see this? And then I'll be like, oh, wow, yeah, let me get right on it. 80% of the time, the second email doesn't come. There are a lot of things that we are asked to do, bookkeeping-wise, data-wise, accumulating data that, by the time it all gets aggregated and moved up and put in somebody else's spreadsheet, it's irrelevant. The data's too old. And so, I know probably as an admin, you don't want to hear me say that. But I'm sometimes I just didn't do it unless I was asked twice. I know how my kids are doing. I really don't need to put it all on the spreadsheet to be able to justify somebody else's
Good.
whatever. So,
I like it.
so basically, like I said, if I had a strong compass of like, is this going to, sometimes it's just busy work. It's not going to move the needle for students. If I have time, I'll do it. But the stuff I'm really doing that's going in a box is the stuff that's going to move the needle for students. And here's the magic though. If you don't do something, or if you decline to do something, you need to give a student focused reason. It can't be like, oh, I can't be on that committee because I'm already on 5, or I have to pick up my kids for daycare, or whatever. It needs to be a student focused reason. And there's plenty of student focused reasons. Like, I would just tell them, and as you may be aware, this year I have many students who are below benchmark. I feel my time is best served, remediating skills for them, throwing all the academic jargon, right? That's the appropriate place for it, is when you're making an excuse not to do something, throwing all the buzzwords, and tell them that your focus is working with students, and bringing them up to standard and all those things. So just make sure it's a student-focused reason, not like, yeah, I didn't think that was important and that wasn't my agenda. That's not going to win you any friends. That's going to make for a rocky road. You can be gracious and still true to your compass.
I love that. That should be a whole episode on how to deal with difficult administrators with the Grace Stevens approach. I love it. So let's get technical with this and geeky with this question.
Okay.
What do you do with your calendar? Do you use an app? Do you use a written calendar, reminders? What do you do, and what do you recommend?
So I would say for about the last 5 or 6 years in the classroom, every year I'd say I'm going to get the digital calendar down, the digital planner. I'd buy it. I'd never use it. Old school, man. I like a brand new planner. Like, I just love it. And then, exactly. And then you go through, especially and then you go through and you block out all your lessons with your ruler and this and that. And then the schedule changes and then you're all mad. You're like, now I've got to put white out. So I really was tied to my physical planner, but I didn't want to bring it back and forth from home. So I will say that sometimes I would just take a photo of it on my phone. So I knew I don't have to take my planner home. I know what is happening. The last, certainly Google Calendar has been groundbreaking. The last 2 years that I taught, I was in this situation where, which I'm sure many of your listeners find themselves in, is that there's only maybe 2 or 3 of you at the grade span. And it would appear that for whatever reason or challenges, you're the only person who stays year in, year out. So every year you're training somebody new, right? It's really burns out the teachers who stay. And so I had made a spreadsheet of our day, the lesson plans, and then we would, there were 3 of us. So, okay, you plan the language arts, you plan the math, you plan the social studies and science. And what we would do with all the periods, each of us would make either a slide deck or the Google document or whatever the resources were and just link it in there. And so we all taught off the same lesson planning doc. And then the following year, guess what? You just copied that week and changed some things around. And so I really did embrace the beauty in that. And when I actually left, when I retired, I felt really bad. There were 3 of us and we all left at the same time. And so there was going to be 3 new teachers there, but it was very reassuring to me. Like, here's all your lessons. Like, here's the whole year planned out. Here's my number. Like, if there's something, that you don't understand. Now, obviously, they're not going to do it verbatim. There's a difference between teaching 20 years and teaching the same year 20 times. You know what I'm saying? But at least it was a framework for them to start with. So I would say if you're in a situation where you have a shared lesson plan and you can delegate the tasks with other people, that's real helpful. And so I did embrace that. But, I am a kind of, even now in my business, I have a planner and I end up traveling and doing different things. And I do the same thing. A lot of the stuff is in Google Classroom, not Google Classroom, Google Calendar. You can see my heart is still in the classroom. But that planner, I just like turning the pages, writing it down. It sticks, there is science about that when you write something down, it sticks more than when you type it. So I just take a like if I'm going to be somewhere else for the weekend or I'm traveling, I just take a photo of the few months. So I know I like to see like the whole scope and sequence, right? I like that.
Amen. Beautiful. So Grace, as an author, what lessons have you learned and what advice do you have for those of us who have been dreaming of writing a book, but we haven't gotten to action, or maybe we, like in my case, I have started like 30 times and I'm like, no, I'm going to give up. What lessons have you learned? What advice do you have?
Well, firstly, you can celebrate the fact that we've seen a democratization in the publishing of books, or to say you can self-publish very easily, okay? And so that whole part of, and successfully too. And so that whole part about needing a publisher, needing an agent and doing all those things, that has been erased. You can buy a course on the internet for $20 on how to publish, right? And that's certainly, how I started self-publishing. In fact, publishers have come to me and I've kind of looked at the whole thing and been like, no, I kind of still believe in the democratization and people being able to do it for themselves. And so I self-publish. As far as getting something finished, it really just depends. For me, I write, nonfiction. I write informational books. Within my own framework, I've developed a framework, and the research isn't mine. Like I'm not, I don't have the budget or the brain science or the bandwidth of Harvard, but I'll look at all their research, and I feel like my magic comes into now. How do you put that in a classroom? What does that look like in a classroom? So for me, that was an easier route to go. And certainly it's infused with stories, but it's not like, a memoir, or I don't feel I'm particularly creative. I could never, it's been a dream of mine decades to write children's literature around anxiety. Suffered from anxiety my whole life. My daughter had a near crippling anxiety disorder, was on 504 plans her whole school career, and there was very little children's literature to explain it to her in children's terms. Now, happy ending, she was on a 504 plan, she had supportive teachers, she's actually now a social worker, she works with childhood mental health, she's a phenomenal, just a beautiful light in this world. And I will forever be, grateful for the psychologists, the school counselors, her teachers who were so great about that. But there was no children's literature about it, really. And so I've always had that dream to write children's literature about it. And I just find I'm not terribly creative. So it depends what kind of book you're going to write. But for me, nonfiction, I just got out honestly, we teach writing to kids. Getting started is the hardest part. I would say leave the introduction till the end, because the introduction is always hard. I literally started with index cards. My cards would laugh like, oh God, we can't vacuum. Like, don't open the door, the cards will fly everywhere. So I'd have the chapter titles, and then I'd have the different things I wanted to put underneath, and then so I could move them around. Now there's a software for that. I use Trello, which has boards, and you can move cards and you can attach things. Like that has been world changing for me. It's a free software, definitely. That has really helped me organize my thoughts, my books, everything. So I'm a big Trello girl. And so that's kind of really it. But I don't know what your dream is, to write fiction or nonfiction or a memoir. What is your dream?
I think the more I think about it, I want to write a combination of the three into one. Because there's things definitely in terms of productivity and learning how to do this gig of leadership, but I also think that sometimes fiction can be more real than nonfiction, because you express the soul in a way and that feeling, and I think where I fall is the organizations of ideas. And I think that Trello is such a great suggestion, because basically you fill out these index cards and then you organize them. And I have failed doing them around.
Yeah. Yes. And then I found myself, I would have stick notes here, and I'd have an idea here, and it was on a note in my phone, and it was somewhere else. And it was like, just chaos. And with Trello, like I just get into the habit of just open a quick Word doc, write it down, or put a Google link in there if there was something that inspired me, and then just attach it to the index card. Like Trello is a fantastic resource. If people don't know that, then definitely, especially now when I work with someone else, like sometimes I have somebody help me with stuff. So I have a Trello board just for my podcast. Like, here's all my episode ideas. Here's all the links. When somebody says, do you have a headshot? Do you have this? What are your questions? Like, it's all there. It's all in one place. And then I have another one for another board for each book that I'm writing, or I'm redoing a book. I wrote a book on teacher boundaries, which I think is really great. And I was so surprised more people didn't buy it. Is how to say no, really in a student focused way, how to set boundaries in all areas of your life, overcoming like kind of this, especially teachers, we're chronic people pleasers, we're conflict avoidant. I mean, that's just the people we are because we care so much, but how it's hurting us in the long run. But anyway, I don't think I had a compelling cover. I don't think the title, it was the Ultimate Boundaries Playbook for Teachers. And I feel like teachers don't make that connection, that the reason they're struggling is their lack of boundaries, right? I needed to phrase it as something else. So I'm in the middle of, which when you independently publish, you can do. You can rebrand your book and put it out. I mean, you need to buy a new ISBN and all those things. You lose the reviews. I had some great reviews on it, which you're like, I got to start from scratch, but that's okay. In the long run, it's more important to me that it reaches the people it needs.
Amen. And musicians are doing the same. They are re-recording their music. In their cases, because of money. In our cases, because of we want the message to be absolutely. And that's a big difference between, do you want to be an educator? It's much more about the money, even though of course the money, it is important. In your podcast, Balance Your Teacher Life, tell us about your podcast. And also, you mentioned about how to get organized with your ideas. What lessons have you learned? What advice do you have?
So the podcast is based, I actually have a course where I work. So I have some short courses like people can knock out in an evening on, how the art of saying no. How do I say no to extra duties? How do I do, another one, a very popular one actually, is protecting your peace. How do I not get sucked into other people's drama? How do I have more peaceful professional relationships, let's say? Okay, so those are like mini courses that I have, but I have this overarching course where I coach people, and it's about balancing your teacher life. And the idea for that is be the hero in your own teaching story. Like, I'll be the guide, but you need to look at all the things that, do you have your North Star? Where are your boundaries, blind spots? Like a lot of times, the things that, we're overgivers, or sometimes we over volunteer. We don't see that as that being like so anyway, helping people find their blind spots, helping them make a boundary plan, helping them overcome their limited beliefs, right, about teaching or about themselves, right? And there's a lot of limiting beliefs right now in teaching. These kids just don't want to learn. Nobody holds kids accountable, and that's kind of like I don't teach people as far as, is that true? Because your brain's going to find a way to make it true. The question is that thought resourceful? Is it productive? Right? So that's why I coach people on. So it's like but the whole course is called Balance Your Teacher Life. And it leads people on this journey of like creating a more positive experience for themselves in the classroom they have, with the kids they have, with the administrator they have, right? Not holding their breath for the dream job. So the podcast was kind of named after that course. And so it is episodes on empowerment, mindset, habits, but very classroom focused. Like, let's say one of the recent episodes was about focusing on what you want. Let's just say that. How do I incorporate that in the classroom? How do I get kids involved in that? Because that's when you get accountable, right? When the kids are like, oh, let's look at the joy jar. Let's, what did we put in, right? Like, so that's kind of what that podcast's about. I do talk about books. No teaching books. Don't talk about any teaching books. I found the most profound and impactful books in my life were not about teaching. And there's podcasts about that. And that's all about student results. And that's about, other things. My work is purely about a teacher having a more positive experience because, as you said in the introduction, your energy teaches more than your lesson plans. And you don't need to be a teacher to know that. You just needed to have gone to school. Right? Which classroom did you learn the most in? Where the teacher seemed overwhelmed, frazzled, low-key resentful about being there, hated the stupid curriculum, whatever. Or the place where maybe the teacher didn't have, the Pinterest-worthy classroom, but they were there for you. They were excited to be there. They were excited to learn. They were excited to share with you their confidence that you could learn. You felt safe with them. They were ready to have fun. They were ready to, if something went, those teachable moments like, okay, we'll take the little tangent and pray the admin doesn't come in, right? Be on guard. You can see him walking up the ramp. Miss S, he's coming. Okay, quick, open your books, right? I mean, I'm not teaching people to be a revolutionary. Maybe I am. But I'm teaching them that your energy is going to teach more than your lesson plans. And so how do you protect your energy? How do you stay present in teaching and present in your life? Because if your life isn't in balance, what's the point? What if you give everything you have to other people's children? By the time you get home, you are so stinking depleted, you have nothing left to give your own children, right? It's really... that causes so much stress. So that's what the podcast is about. And I think it is a little bit of a different angle. Now I forgot the rest of the question. You asked me about the podcast.
How do you learn? What have you learned about getting organized to, lights, microphones,
that kind of stuff?
to ask, yes. the productivity side of, because everybody wants to have a podcast, but they don't realize.
Yeah. So I would say, listen, if you have something to say, a podcast is a lot easier than writing a book.
Amen.
The cost of entry is very low. Oh my gosh. When I started, I felt I need a website and I need this and I need that. And I do courses, course platforms, hosting videos. Emails are it is so much money. I mean, when you say I don't do it for the money, but it's I do need to earn money to keep producing a lot of it for free. So that's really expensive. But a podcast is not. A podcast you can get going for $12 a month, right? I'm on Buzzsprout. Shout out to Buzzsprout. It's $12 a month. Don't overcomplicate it. Right now I'm on my laptop. Right now are people going to be embarrassed? I'm sitting in a bathroom right now. It's the most soundproof room in this apartment.
And you have a beautiful background.
That is my mirror. That is, if I move over too much, you can see my curling tongs. Who cares? Nobody knew that unless I told you. I have a laptop. I have a Yeti mic. It's $100. I have a Loom, one little light. Ooh. You don't overcomplicate it. So that's as far as the tech goes. Go on YouTube. Go how to start a podcast. Go listen to podcasts on how to start a podcast. There's a great one if you're looking to monetize your podcast at some point, which not many teachers are, but it's called Podcasting Business School. And really, there's so many great podcasts out there on how to run a podcast. So that's the tech. Don't get caught up on the tech. First off, be a guest on podcasts. I would say start there. How do you know how to be in a podcast? Unless, you listen to them. I listen to many, many of them, but it was how I started a podcast, to be honest, was I was asked to be guested on. I must have guested on 20 or 30. And I'm like, how fun is this? I really enjoyed it. And then I learned when you ask questions, you do this, you do the other. So now most of my episodes are solo episodes. Maybe every fourth or fifth one, I ask a guest. But for the most part, I guess I just, have a lot to say. So for me, getting organized was the Trello board. I just did a big brain dump of all the ideas I had. I set a timer for 15 minutes and I'm telling you, I had 75 ideas. And so I had the running list, and then I just made a production planner on a spreadsheet. And then so it has, the podcast name, the episode. Then I have a link to a Google Doc. Each podcast episode, I have a deep Google Doc where I made a template that has, intro, outline, all the things. And that one Google Doc for each episode, let's say I had you as a guest, Dr. Martinez. So on there, I would put, the things I was going to ask you, whatever. But then I would also link, here's his headshot, here's his bio, like everything all in one place. Right. Then put that in the podcast tracker. And then the tracker has check marks like, has it been recorded? Yes. Has it been edited? Yes. Has it been scheduled? Yes. Have you written the show notes? Yes. Have you written an email about it? Yes. Then do you have social media assets? So just like a little checkbox. And the reason for that is at one point I had I had an assistant helping me a couple hours a week, and she was doing the social media assets. I have no interest in that, right? Stay in your zone of genius. She was like 40 years younger than me, like social media, that's your racket, darling. Go for it, right? But and then put that in Trello, so everybody knows where you're at. Just stay organized but it's just a simple spreadsheet. And I used to batch my content, which was amazing. Wait till I knew it was a quiet day. We have a lot of construction, live in a city, a lot of construction going by. So I used to batch on Sundays when I knew there wasn't going to be any construction going on. And, you kind of get in the mood and you get energized and you batch them out, and at least the recording. And then the week of, then I do the show notes. I do a blog post for it. Every episode too. It's a lot. Use AI to help with that.
For sure.
Use your tools, use AI, get the transcript, right? Use AI for that to make the transcript. Then when you got the transcript, go to AI, put it in. Here's a podcast transcript. Here's the tone. I trained AI with a sample of what my tone of voice is and whatever. And then write a show summary based on this transcript. It's based on your own words. So use AI where you can as a tool, not as to create stuff for you, but even, you can use AI. I'm a podcast host. This is my podcast, and tell it, my guest is an expert in XYZ. Give me 10 great questions to guide the podcast, right? There's a lot of things you can use AI for. It's still going to be you. You get to use the discretion whether you use those questions or not. You get to ask them in your own way. But if you're just stumped sometimes for ideas, AI can really help. So I think there's a lot of tools. Let me say this, though, because we talked about don't use AI to write a book.
For sure.
Oh, my God.
You will get... even the educational magazines, when you because that's another thing I have been aspiring to, is send something to Edutopia or Edweek. It says do not use AI to submit, and that is a signal right there that you must be aware.
Yeah, it's not going to be good. I mean, maybe I do know some authors who have used AI to help them with an outline or whatever, but that's strictly nonfiction. But don't you can work on a cover, you can work on a book description, you can work on keywords, all the thing that's going to make your book successful. You can pay for advertising, you can pay for, advanced reviews and all those things, but, crap in a box, even if the box is pretty,
for sure,
still doesn't smell good. You know what I'm saying?
Amen.
So you have to have even though I say, it's got a lot easier to do, it has to be a good product. Otherwise, you're not going to get very far.
AI is like an app, but you are the iPhone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's it's a tool. Use it for some shortcuts. Use it for a transcript. It's not writing anything for me. It's just saving me typing it down, whatever, right? Use a summary. I usually rewrite the summary because it sounds like AI wrote it and I didn't. But it can cut the time from half an hour to write a summary to 5 minutes to write a summry. I'm all down for that. Right. Absolutely. It used to be the producer my podcast, after I'd recorded it, the show notes, the blog post, and all the other stuff, getting it scheduled, used to be 3 time boxes. And I get it down now to 1.5 time boxes because I use AI to help me, but I'm still doing it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So anyway, so I would say have a good production planner of all the tasks in one place. And when you can batch, because you have to be in the mood, like the energy is like, wow, now when I'm talking to you, I've had other ideas like, hey, I should do an episode on that, right? Like when we're talking, we're like, oh, that would be a good episode. So have a place to brain dump it all. And then just, but Trello should be paying me at this point. Put it in the Trello board. And that way, you have shared spaces. When I could afford somebody to help me for a little bit, a couple hours a week, I'm like, here's the board, go, do this, go do that. And it's all in a centralized place. But to start a podcast is really a low cost, low point of entry, but have a vision for it. And don't just sit down and talk, like, know what you're there's too much noise out there. So know what you're trying to accomplish, know what your zone of genius is. I know that tone can put people off, but everybody has one. There's something that you do really well, everybody, that people want to know. And maybe that's just interviewing people. When you look at if you look at indie authors and somebody who's so successful and has such a successful podcast like Tim Ferriss, right? I don't know if you know him, the 4-Hour Work Week and all of this. None of that is his work. He's just real good at taking other people's work and, putting it down into a framework. And he's really good at interviewing and, all those.
And he definitely uses AI for his podcast summaries.
Yes. So, there's different ways you can do it. Maybe you're real curious about people. One of the, another podcast, and I know you know her because she's in the same podcast network we are, the lady who does Dana, who does in the trenches, out of the trenches.
Yeah,
right?
I was a guest in her podcast, and she was a guest in mine.
Me too, but she's just like curious as to how, it's tough and you get stuck in it, and how did you dig yourself out? Like, that's a really interesting premise. And so everybody has something, it's not everybody's dream to be a podcaster, but if it is your dream, follow it, try it and see, but be consistent. You got to that's the other thing, like how you do anything is how you do everything, right? My light just died, sorry. Right. So don't just kind of dabble, be committed for a certain amount of time to give it a good go. So that would be my advice for that.
My last question, Grace, when you take out the robes of inspiring figure, coach, author, and all that stuff, what do you do for fun?
Oh, me? So this is a cautionary tale. Don't make what you do for fun into a job, otherwise it isn't fun anymore. Because my first side hustle, when I was looking to make money, I'm a quilter. I really like to quilt. Going back to producing something with our hands, and the fact that my mom was a seamstress. And so I made beautiful quilts, and I found it very relaxing, that it takes hours and hours and hours, and then I would give them away. And a friend of my life was like, stop giving them away. And I'm like, well, you can't produce enough quilts to it takes 100 hours. What could you possibly charge for it? But I decided I could make quilt patterns. And this was about 15 years ago. And before there were a lot on the internet and whatever. And so that was my first side hustle, was making quilt patterns. And it sucked the joy right out of it for me. So I was like, there's something. So I do like to quilt. I like to do something with my hands. I like to paint. I like to be active. So I'm a cyclist. And I also, since I've retired, of course, what is taking over the world, pickleball. Love it. Love to play me some pickleball. It's like giant ping pong. I'm not terribly athletic. I've never played like a team sport or anything. Cycling is very kind of solo, right? The things I do, cycling, yoga, kind of solo things. I had moved to a new town. I needed to meet people. And so I decided to start playing pickleball. So that's super fun. But really a great day for me is still reading a good book, laughing with my mom, cooking a good meal, simple pleasures, being present, just being present. Sometimes just going for a walk. I'm really pleased that I know how to change my change my moods. Like especially at this age, I know like I'm a little down and I do what I call a joy walk. Let's just go for a walk and either find 5 things I like or find one person to help. Don't come home till you help someone. And it doesn't always have to be like, something huge. Sometimes it can, I don't know, people always, if you go out with that intention, you'll find somebody who's lost or whose car needs jumping or I don't know, sometimes people just want to talk or something. I don't know. I've never once left the house and said, I'm not coming back till I found somebody to connect with and help. The opportunity has always presented itself. So simple pleasures like that, going for a walk and like finding things I like.
Beautiful. Grace, it has been such a luxury having you in the show. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your mission and your passion. And as an administrator, what an unsung, unthankful job I have to say you have. So thanks for doing that. Listen, there was always a pressure on me to be an administrator. That was one of the things I should have told you that I learned is don't separate yourself from the stuff you love. Remember my story of how I loved finding people jobs and then I was very lonely at the top. And as soon as I became a teacher, the superintendent who actually hired me said, you would be great for administration. You know how to manage budgets, you know how to manage people, blah, blah, blah. And I told him, I'm a teacher and that's all I want to do. Don't take me out the classroom. And all the years that I taught, every year, oh, administrator, oh, union rep, oh, this. No, I know why I became a teacher and I know what I like to do. And that was be with kids. And but thank you to you because it is a thankless job. I know that.
Grace, thank you so much. Have a fantastic weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efrain Martinez.
Chulo.
And LS.production. Chulo out.